Hello guys, welcome to my podcast Thinking in Sound. I'm Ausra and today is my episode number 24 and I'm going to talk about organ registration secrets, achieving authentic Baroque sounds on modern instruments. Well, is it possible to achieve Baroque sounds on the modern instruments? And my answer is no. So what to do if you have to play a Baroque piece on the modern instrument? Well, actually you just need to adjust to it and try to make as good registration as it is possible. Well, keep in mind, what kind of instrument it is. If it's like modern, or I don't know, it's modern imitating some sort of Baroque style, or it's modern imitating romantic style, so you need to determine that. Well, and the best is, to know in advance what kind of instruments you are going to play and to select your repertoire accordingly. Because I think the worst thing that could happen, and it happened for me and Vidas in the past, that you select a repertoire which is not well appropriated for given instrument. When you come, let's say, to play romantic music and you see that Baroque music would sound it much better on such an instrument. So keep that in mind, if you can find the specification of instrument that you are going to perform, that's a very useful tool to have. Then you can think about your registration ahead of time and prepare it in advance, and then maybe just do slight adjustments on the spot. Another thing which is very helpful is to find recordings of a given instrument, which might give you an impression of the space, of acoustics, and of what sounds good on the instrument and what sounds not so good. Now, when registering Baroque music on the modern organs, I think it's very important to remember some ground rules. Let's see, if you are playing a major piece by J.S. Bach, Prelude and Fugue, then of course you need a piano registration. And if let's say Hauptwerk, main manual has the 16-foot stop, then obviously it's a good decision to include it into a piano registration. But that way, of course, you would have probably to include two mixtures, the low mixture and the high mixture. Sometimes that one manual might not have both mixtures, so you might need to coupler that other mixture from another manual, if that's possible. For example, that's what Vidas does at St. John's when he plays Baroque music. He often couples the higher mixture from the Oberwerk to the Hauptwerk, which has only a low mixture. I never do it myself because couplers make that keyboard almost impossible to play on, but since he has more muscle power than I do, he does that. Not often, but occasionally. Another thing to consider would be, how to register, let's say, trio sonata. I don't know if you often perform, of course, trio sonata, or in general, not necessarily trio sonata, but trio texture, Baroque trio texture on the modern instrument, how to register it. And I often hear that organists want to avoid the 16-foot stop in the pedal. And I think that's sort of incorrect way of thinking. I remember myself when I was still a student at the Academy of Music, I also would register it without 16-foot. And why? My thinking about it was that, well, if I'm adding the 16-foot stop, then my pedals will be sort of a little bit slow, because the longer pipes make the sound come slightly late. That's what I thought at that time. And I thought if I will only register it the 8-foot, stops, it will be easier for me to play, I will play more precise, and everything will sound much better. But when registering actual Baroque trio, you need to think about the other instruments who played the trio in Baroque time. And if you would listen to the consorts, ensembles of Baroque music, how they play trio, you would notice that really often the bass line is really the most important, and that you could hear, of course, when cembalo or harpsichord plays the basso continuo, which projects that bass line, and then it's really often doubled with the low instruments such as, for example, cello or gamba. Sometimes it could be bassoon, so it really projects that bass line, and it's very important because usually two other instruments are higher pitched, has much brighter sound than the low instrument, and we project much better even if we play their part alone. But for the bass line, you need really to emphasize it, especially if you are playing in the big acoustics. Okay, now let me just drink some water, and I'll talk a little bit more about it after a break. And I'm drinking from our beautiful Secrets of Organ Playing cup. Well, and another suggestion would be when registering Baroque music on a modern instrument, if you have a good assistant or somebody next to you who can play at least some of your music, just ask him or her to do it, and go further away from the organ. If the organ stands up high in the balcony, you need to go downstairs and to see how things are balanced, because it's very important. Well, if you are playing at your casual daily organ where you have an organist position, then of course the instruments so well that you can register with your eyes closed, and you don't need to check what sound it makes downstairs because you know it by heart. But if you are in a different environment, different church, different hall, you really need to check it out, because what you hear upstairs in the organ balcony might be really misleading. Well, because every organ has its own specific and its own tricks, and especially if you are playing organ that has, let's say, root positive, and it has more, let's say, than two keyboards, when you never know how really each of those manuals sounds downstairs, because root positive often sounds much louder downstairs when you can hear at the keyboard. But for example, if you are having Brustwerk, then the sound of the Brustwerk for organist itself might be deafening, but it sounds actually quite mild downstairs. So keep in mind these suggestions, and really ask somebody to play your music for you, that you could check your balance. And well, another suggestion when playing Baroque music, for example, I don't like to add stops and U-stops such as Celeste, and stops that have lots of reverberation in themselves. And for example, I use tremulants only for like slow movements, and definitely not for for loud movements, because sometimes you can hear that even at our St. John's Church, when some strangers come to play it, that we put onda maris, into a pleno sound, which is horrifying. Or we try to play onda maris alone by itself, which is actually a huge mistake, and things like that. So I think you just need to trust your intuition, because you will never really make modern organ sound as a Baroque organ, and probably you don't have to. Your goal should not be to make it sound as authentic as possible. Well, just really you need to find out the best organ stops, what sounds really good and what really works for that particular organ. And I think the rest of that Baroque sounding thing you will have to achieve by adjusting your articulation and your tempo probably too. And I think this is the most important thing, because I think articulation makes all the difference while playing Baroque music. Because if you will play legato, let's say the Prelude of by Bach, so it does not matter where will you play it, on the modern instrument or on the Baroque instrument, it will sound badly, and won't be really authentic. So think about all these things and send me your questions, because otherwise I will have to come up with my own topics. And thank you very much for watching me, and I'll see you in my next episode next week. Thank you for supporting me, and please buy me some coffee if you feel so much inclined. I will appreciate it a lot, and see you in my next episode next week. Bye bye.